Former Goldman Sachs chief economist Jim O'Neill is credited with coining the acronym BRICS to describe the building block which has grown from the original 5 countries, Brazil, Russia, India, China, and later joined by South Africa, from the initials which he gave it the name, to 11 different countries. This was a few years ago. It was very definitely a group of emerging economies, but all that has changed now. Russia is back in the top 10 global economies, with some reports, even a begrudging BBC article, conceding there are reports of it surging ahead of several European economies. The same European economies that are sanctioning Russia. India is the fastest growing economy in the world, much of this being thanks to those same sanctions, which is causing it to help Russia to circumvent those sanctions. Africa is home to several of the fastest growing economies in the world, and Ethiopia, a BRICS member since January this year, is the fastest of them. Media states that over 20 countries attended the summit in Kazan, but it doesn't actually mention that there were in fact 36 countries in attendance, but over 20 of them sent their leaders, making BRICS, for the first time ever, more important globally than the G7 and the G20. It now includes well over 40% of the global population, and if new members are added soon, this will increase to cover half the world. In the classic way in which the BBC trivializes this kind of information and provides misinformation to its consumers, Jim O'Neill is quoted as being a critic of the group. Like-minded, he says, is not a word we can use to describe them. He's noted as saying, quote, "In some ways it's a good job for the West that China and India can never agree about anything, because if those two were really serious, BRICS would have enormous influence." They are really serious, because in a stunning lack of journalistic integrity, the BBC has absolutely no mention anywhere that China and India have actually agreed on something integral to both countries. They are reopening discussions that they have both pulled back from conflict and are looking to a resolution to a problem that the British caused over 100 years ago, the long-running border dispute. Reuters, to give credit where it's due, reported that this matter in a short article entitled "China Confirms Pact to Resolve Border Conflict with India." It seems, despite Western media's inference that China is isolated, India won't talk to it, and Russia has no friends, quite the opposite is true. The BBC search engine, if we decided to take a look for BRICS, B-R-I-C-S, does not reveal any article in recent days with the acronym BRICS in it. A search on the day after the BRICS summit concluded required me to scroll right down to the 5th entry, where there's an article about Putin, and the word BRICS doesn't appear in the headline. It's critical of Putin for attempting to gather, quote, allies to show that the West's pressure isn't working. What it doesn't say in the headline is that 3 of the world's current top economies are member of this group. It's so trivial that the BBC can't even name the group. India is the fastest growing economy in the world, and it has the world's largest democracy. It's a country the West calls like-minded, but is currently disparaging at every opportunity over their internal issues, some external issues with the recent murder of an opposition leader in Canada, and the attempted murder of another in the USA, being attributed to the Indian government. BRICS, far from being, as the New York Times likes to call it, a so-called BRICS group, is in fact a group of some significance. In another sparkling example of Western media misinformation, China is believed by many consumers of this misinformation to be a slowing economy. In fact, it's still growing at twice the rate of the United States. It's blitzing other major economies such as Germany, Japan, and the UK, and at a projected 5% growth, it's 10 times higher than Australia is forecast to be for this year. How China continues to grow in the face of all of the restrictions and bad media placed on it by the USA is simple. It's changed its markets. David P. Goldman of the Asia Times points out in a Twitter post that China is developing the global south as a new market, This is not a surprise. This is a long-held strategy. For years, President Xi has been talking about global development. China has even presented this at the United Nations, and this in itself is a nod to BRICS. Reading the Kazan Declaration, which I've linked, is very clear to see what BRICS is all about. This isn't about an anti-West or anti-dollar organization. It's not about poking the US in the eye despite inviting Venezuela to the summit and adding Iran to the list of members. It's about removing barriers to global impoverishment. And for some reason, Western media seems to think this is not a great idea. However, more than half the world's population seems to think it might be, probably because they don't watch the BBC. Take a look at the Kazan Declaration. See what is really happening under Russia's leadership. It's 18 pages long, but it's well worth a read. And from that, I'm going to leave you to do it and rejoin my holiday. I'm still in Sri Lanka, and I just thought this needed to be said. Thanks very much for your time. Thanks for liking and sharing. I'm sorry about the background noise and the environment. This is a relatively cheap hotel that I'm in right now. We had better last week. See you next time anyway. Bye for now.